net vir ons derde paneel het, as julle 'n bietjie geduld met ons sal hê asseblief. Goeiemôre, ek dink ons gaan maar begin. As ons paneel het opdaag, sal ons net die verrigting 'n bietjie onderbreek, dat hy kan 'n sitplek inneem. My naam is Gert van die Westhuizen, ek is Netwerk24 se politieke redakteur en baie welkom hier by die Jake Scherwel gespreksreeks. Ek gaan ongelukkig nou moet oorslaan na my Vrystaatse Engels, om ons gaste te akkommodeer, so julle moet maar geduld gebruik met my. Good morning, thanks for coming. I've got with me Professor Anthony Butler. He's a professor in political studies at the University of Cape Town, and he's written several books. His latest one is Presidential Power. It's well worth the read, as is Tara Roos's Where to From Here. The books fill a whole shelf next door, so please go and buy it. It's well worth reading. So the topic of today's discussion is actually the succession debate in the ANC. Who will wear the crown next year? In about a year and a half's time, political debates are being overshadowed to an extent by the succession debate. So, Professor, if I can start with you, and let's get the elephant out of the room. What do you think of all the indications that Patrice Motsepe might be the next ANC leader?
I think it's very unlikely. First of all, because he keeps saying he doesn't want to do it. Secondly, because he has no history of holding political office. and he hasn't been exposed to the complexities of running a political party organization, running a campaign, dealing with pressures from a whole range of constituencies who you're not exposed to as a businessman. So by all accounts, he's been a tremendously successful businessman. But in his more political role at FIFA, in the African Footballing Federation, he's found it more difficult to manage the complex politics. And I think the ANC is an extremely complicated party, time-consuming party. And I think for that reason, we can expect the new ANC president to come from inside. That doesn't mean that Motsepe is out of the picture, because there are many situations in which the state president in our new political dispensation will not be the head of a political party. So it's possible to imagine a scenario in which a coalition between two parties, neither of which has 50%, which we can expect, that they choose someone who's not from either party, or someone who's a junior figure in one of those parties to be the state president. So that would be my first thought. But I still think that's unlikely also.
It will be very difficult to manage those two centers of power, won't it?
That's an old ANC phrase, two centers of power, which allegedly people were concerned about in the ANC in the Mbeki period, when Mbeki wanted to run everything. But remember that Mbeki decided that two centers of power weren't so bad when he had to leave office. So in 2007, he decided to stay on as ANC president. At Polokwane, he was defeated by Zuma, but he thought he could run the country hands off from the Thuli House, with Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma as his figurehead state president. And you'll never guess what Jacob Zuma decided to do in 2017. He decided that maybe his former wife and close factional ally, Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma, should also create a complex structure of governance again, in which the party leader isn't centrally in control of the party and the state. And you never know, perhaps Cyril Ramaphosa will take the same decision. Perhaps he'll decide, I am a constitutionalist, but there's nothing to stop my party from asking me to stay on as ANC president for another term, to oversee the transition to coalition politics. So all of the options that we assumed in the past to limit the succession process, those are no longer there in coalition times, I think.
Tara, I forgot to mention that you're the parliamentary reporter for Business Day as well. Sorry about that. If not Motsepe, who then?
I think the race right now is between Fikile Mbalula and Paul Mashitile. Fikile Mbalula, I think to the public, many people roll their eyes and they think he isn't quite fit to be the leader of the ANC, let alone the president of the country. But he is extremely popular inside the ANC. And ANC politics, it is widely said within the ANC, the beauty of the ANC is that the public and the media doesn't understand it. ANC leaders and ANC politics is not about things we would think about in terms of popularity and governance. It's about factions and it's about factionalism. And those are the two figures that have the strongest factions at the moment. I do think it's a very much neck and neck race between Paul Mashitile and Fikile Mbalula. And I think this question could actually hit us much sooner than possible. The Phala judgment will be handed down within this month. And it could bring a massive, the succession question is much closer than we think.
So Fikile Mbalula, he has got the levers of power in his hands as Secretary General, and he's already started moving. So you think he will try and use his position to better his chances of becoming president?
Absolutely. Everyone who is a politician is ultimately power hungry. Everyone wants to see themselves in the presidential role. And when we look at almost the contradictions between Paul Mashitile and Fikile Mbalula. Paul Mashitile, despite being the deputy president, doesn't have the same buy-in inside the ANC that Fikile Mbalula does, whereas Fikile Mbalula doesn't have the buy-in almost of the state, and he hasn't been inside government for quite a while. And so they both have strengths, they both have weaknesses, but it really is a factional debate between the two.
Oh, welcome, Qaanitah Hunter. You're a very well-known journalist and writer as well.
Blame the airline.
and Cape Town traffic,
And
never
Cape Town
forget
traffic.
that.
I'm going to be a politician and not take responsibility for this. I'm so sorry. I said I was going to be 2 minutes late. I was 7 minutes late, but then the stairs, that's your fault.
No, don't worry, Qaanitah. You didn't miss too much. We were talking about the succession debate in the ANC that's already starting. And I was asking the question to Professor Butler, what about Patrice Motsepe as president of the ANC? He said that is not very likely. What do you think?
So I think that every time the ANC has to elect a leader, they try. There's some quarters try to push this idea of taking an outsider, and the appeal of the outsider is the same people that kind of look at the likes of your, like Donald Trump, for example, and say, well, you kind of have this decisive rich person from the outside, and he'll make a difference, right? And so the Patrice Motsepe campaign, or non-campaign as you like, is rooted in that everybody's rotten. We need to find someone who will be palatable to the masses, who won't be corrupt, etc., etc. Now, the question is, does Patrice Motsepe want to be president? And he'll say no, but Cyril Ramaphosa, said he didn't want to be president, but raised half a billion rand.
Half a billion rand, yeah.
To become president, right? So political ambition is and Patrice Motsepe wanting to be president or not is not the point. And the fact that he has that public sort of, I don't want the job, I'm very happy at CAF and I'm happy making my money, makes him more palatable to the people trying to find a candidate. Because remember, in the ANC, it's also people need to coalesce around some figurehead. And the thing is, the current leaders that you have don't command that same level of coalescing around, right? So you have those who are pushing Paul Mashatile to be president, is that their survival is desperately hung on his survival. And that has proven to be unsustainable in the past, right? And then the second part of it is you have the Fikile Mbalula type of kind of sort of people dancing around his orbit, because he commands enormous enormous power as a Secretary General. So it kind of feels like the winning bet more than this is the visionary that's going to recover this party, right? And so there's definitely a shopping for an external candidate. I think it's the person who's going to be able to outspend.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
money.
and
Money
Patrice
makes
Motsepe is one of
sense.
the few people that have enough money to do that.
Or whoever becomes this kind of, because remember, Patrice Motsepe, it's not about his leadership prowess. It's that what he represents. So if it's not him, they'll try to find someone else.
Yeah.
Some people say he represents ethical leadership, and that's something the ANC desperately needs at the moment. Do you think that will count in his favor, maybe, Prof?
That doesn't seem very likely to me. Ethical leadership hasn't been central to ANC presidential campaigns in the past. But on the other hand, when it comes to money, we need to remember that there's a lot of money around at ANC conference time, and despite the best efforts of the factional managers, people get paid money to influence the way that they vote. But the voting integrity at ANC conferences remains, I think, unchallenged. So delegates vote without their cell phones. Their cell phones are taken away from them before they cast their votes, which means they cannot prove to a generous donor or benefactor which way they voted. And that's a really important aspect of governance of elections, that bribing somebody who can't prove that they voted the way they said they were going to can be a waste of your money. Yeah. So money does count, but money doesn't count decisively, in the sense that a rich person can outgun a poor person. So
But you can in the manipulation, Prof. No? Sorry, I'm jumping.
No,
right
no, you
here.
can jump in. by
You're-
all means.
In the
you're-
manipulation before voting day.
you're right, there's a lot of money in manipulation of different kinds. But my guess would be that in ANC elections, there's something of a gamble there, that some of it is organizational resources. So of that $500 million that Ramaphosa's camp broadly probably spent, maybe half of that is formal money that went through the machinery of the faction, through bank accounts. The other half was money that went into different campaigns at different levels of the party, where there were no records, no real control over what the money was spent on, and so on. There's a lot of money of that kind that helps you to run a campaign. Both sides will be able to access significant resources, I think, if they've got a credible chance of winning, because most of the money is post-election, right? So people will support Mashitile, if they do, partly because of what they expect to happen to them after the election, not because they believe he's a fine person to lead, so they're going to give them their money, yeah? And I think that changes the calculation. So to the degree that an ANC president remains powerful, in control of resources once elected, and in control of positions that they can allocate, economic opportunities, then they will attract backers. And there are two other aspects of Motsepe that I think are important. One of them is positive to having him on the ticket, which is that he seems to be viewed reasonably favorably and has, by the public, and he has name recognition to some degree. And the other candidates do not have very strong name recognition or favorability. And that's important because votes now count. In the old days, the ANC could choose whoever they wanted because they were going to win the election. Now they can't do that. They've got to think seriously about popularity and votes with the people who do vote. That 40% of the voting age population who actually vote. Yeah. A second factor that matters, that I think is important, is that unlike in the past, we know that coalition partners are going to be needed. And that means you need, in some way, a coalition-friendly president. And it's in the nature of coalition politics that you don't know for sure who your coalition partners are going to be. You have to create uncertainty as part of the process of bargaining and negotiation. And some of these characters are better than others when it comes to coalition friendliness. And Mashitile is not coalition friendly, and neither really is Motsepe. He's not experienced, doesn't really have the right political linkages. I mean, the one that looks, or perhaps the two that look strongest from that point of view are Umbalula, who reportedly went down very well with the DA negotiators of the coalition and the IFP, and played an important role. The other one is maybe, well, there are maybe other third candidates available who might be much better bets for acceptable and effective coalition partners.
Can I jump in?
Yeah,
here?
you can jump in.
So obviously when ahead of a conference, there's all sorts of names that are thrown around. And I think that those two metrics are kind of used in the sense that this is the first ANC election where there's no guarantee that that ANC president is going to be the president of the republic. And that reality is kind of nerve-wracking for party structures and the way things have been done, right? You would have thought that there would be an effort to kind of shake things up bottom up. That really hasn't, because you've seen what you've seen in the Eastern Cape, and so there isn't an effort to reform. But I found what happened in Limpopo quite interesting, which was to say, hey, listen, let's put all our factional fights aside. Here's a woman, she's doing a fine job, the premier, let's make her the chairperson, and let's have it uncontested. So I do know for a fact that there's some sort of effort, and there's no word such as the Ramaphosa faction, because that has that has sort of morphed in so many ways over time, right? But I do think that there's this kind of hunger to say, who can bring us all together, be palatable to like the warring factions in the party. And also you must remember, power has shifted so dramatically in the ANC because of the deterioration of KZN. So actually where power lies kind of Limpopo, Eastern Cape and Mpumalanga, which is a bit weird, right, in so many ways. And so I do think that there's going to be an effort to find a unifying candidate. I don't know if that candidate is going to be Motsepe, but there's going to be an effort. People are throwing the names of Ronald Lamola. People have previously, maybe a year ago, thrown the name of the current speaker because she seems to have had a really positive role in bringing.
But do they have a
together.
realistic chance of getting elected?
The point is that if they use the Limpopo model to say we negotiate this, and if someone like Mbalula is pragmatic, he can say, well, I could be unpalatable, but I can maintain control from behind the scenes.
Tara, please speak to us about Paul Mashitile. Everybody was talking about Paul Mashitile, and it seems that his campaign has hit a bit of a slump.
Yeah. Paul Mashatile is a very interesting character and figure inside the ANC. His ties to the Alex Mafia, Peter du Toit wrote a very good book about Paul Mashatile and his rise within the ANC. It's something that should be very concerning to most South Africans. Paul Mashatile is a very dubious character, and we don't really know much about him. When we look at his criminal links and criminal ties, it is so apparent in ways that we haven't seen with any president or potential presidential candidate before, even the likes of Jacob Zuma. And it's something that it has internally almost strengthened the base of the RET faction inside the ANC and all of Paul Mashitile's faction, because, as both Qaanitah and Prof. Butler said, that they want to back Paul Mashitile because they know they could enrich themselves, whether it be financially in the future with Paul Mashitile's rise inside the party. But Paul Mashitile is not a strong political figure, and moreover, he doesn't really have financial backing in the way that a Patrice Motsepe or even a Fikile Mbalula has internally inside the ANC. And I don't think we can almost disconnect how big money is and how big of a factor it is rather inside the ANC. I mean, Patrice Motsepe is extremely wealthy. Every single year, despite him not having a natural constituency inside the ANC, he pays millions of rands every single year to fill up FNB Stadium for the ZCC Church. That is a massive ANC voting constituency, and that would be a national Patrice Motsepe constituency. If we look back to CR17 and what happened in 2017 at Nasrec, Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma was wildly popular internally and both externally. People across the political spectrum loved her as a political figure. But Cyril Ramaphosa had more money, and he outspent her by a margin. And so ultimately, I do think if the race had to come down between an Mbalula, a Mashitile, and a Motsepe, I think Motsepe would win, surely because of the money. You can buy an internal faction. You might not know how someone votes, but ultimately, when you look at this trying to find, as Qaanitah said, a unifying character, people want someone who is going to come in with a quote-unquote renewed vision. When we look at what Cyril Ramaphosa had campaigned on in 2019, it was supposed to be his era of renewal. That didn't happen at all. And there is almost this search for a continuation of that because the ANC doesn't know who they are. They've lost their political identity since falling below 50%. And I don't think that the answer is going to come from inside the party.
You were talking about the unifying figure, Qaanitah. It seems that we are always looking for a sort of a messiah to lead the country, to lead the party. You know, since the time of Nelson Mandela, who led us from apartheid to democracy, he was this messiah figure. He still, in a certain sense, is. Do you think we're still looking for something like that?
I think that will always be there because it's just part and parcel of sort of the resilient nature of South Africa that, like, you know, there will be someone who won't let this country burn. I think that's the sentiment, right? And I think it's well-spirited. I don't think it's defeatist in any way. But I think that I just wanted to reflect on what Tara was saying about money. As you were talking, I was thinking about that 2017 moment and to what Prof said about you don't really know how money was spent. We actually don't know for a fact that Cyril Ramaphosa had more money than Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma. We only knew the quantum of his monies because it was leaked, right? We don't know how much of the state money and resources were repurposed in that campaign, right? But the second part of it is that the ultimate kind of twist of political faith at the time could have been money, but to propel Cyril Ramaphosa to be a serious contender against the Jacob Zuma establishment, because that was what Nkosazana was representing, not herself in that race, but it really was the political wielding and dealing of David Mabuza, which we must never forget. So what I'm saying is that money plays an important role, but money plays an important role not in a parachuting way. And I'll give you an example. There's a sense of distastefulness to like kind of the parachuting from outside and using money to spend. I'll give you an example. In eThekwini, there's a guy called Sandile Zungu, billionaire, entrepreneur type, who tried to become the chairperson with money, and he was defeated. There's other examples in regional conferences. So that's why I'm saying the only way the Motsepe moneyed campaign works is that if there's a negotiated thing inside to say, hey, my guy, we're going to have to negotiate coalitions, who's the best figure, and that it then becomes, he almost becomes the proxy of these two power battles in the ANC between Balula and between Mashatile. I don't think as a three-way race he stands a real chance in that way, because there is a history of distaste of people coming and peppering money, and let me give you another example of this. You remember the Roger Jardine campaign? What was the name of that?
Change starts now.
That was the same kind of type of people that thought, okay, you know what? Let's create this alternative to the ANC. We'll throw a huge amount of money, someone who's palatable to the public. That thing doesn't really work with the electorate. So exactly what Prof was saying, name recognizability and popularity always still plays a role. And you can't discount that. And so back to the thing of a messiah figure, I think that the negotiation or the dance of like, how much do you want to go down taking the party with you? You know, so if you Paul Mashitile, is being president the only chance you have? And probably yes. But if you're Fikile Balula, you still have a game that you can play, and you can leverage power in a different way. But are you mature enough to see beyond, your immediate hold on power?
Prof, do you see any other credible candidates? Some people have even mentioned the Minister of Electricity as a possible candidate. Qaanitah mentioned Ronald Lamola. Do you think there's a chance of any other one coming from?
Yes, I do. As Qaanitah observed, the Speaker of Parliament is a very credible potential coalition candidate, partly because she has nominally she has a background in KZN from a long time ago. And I think that's actually really important, because although KZN has suffered hugely, the ANC and KZN, for all kinds of reasons, electorally and politically, I think that there's still a hope in the ANC leadership that MK Party may not be durable, that it depends too much on the current leader, and that really is the only pool of voters that the ANC can look to try to regain some ground, or at least to remain the largest party. And so that's one reason why Senzo Mchunu was looked to be Ramaphosa's people's candidate for the succession, because he understands the politics of the province. The province is a very complicated one, but it's a place in which there are advantages to having some affiliation and background there. So she's one candidate. I wanted to say something more about money, actually, that was alluded to, because I suspect, the figure, the 500 million figure, was actually leaked to me by people inside Ramaphosa's campaign. So I put it in the book. And it's a very credible figure, and I got breakdowns. What we don't know about Dlamini Zuma is where her campaign got its money from. But we do know that there are other sources of funding that Ramaphosa alluded to in a leaked NEC meeting clip. I'm not sure if you remember that one.
Yeah.
So conveniently leaked it was, if you start complaining about where I'm getting money from, I'm going to point to where you're getting money from. Yeah, which there are two things that could mean, or three things. One of them is parastatals. So parastatal supply chains we know are tremendously corrupted in the Zuma period. Lots of money sloshing around there that is still important to party funding. Another source is potentially foreign donations, and we don't really pay enough attention to that because we don't know what's going on. But it's very easy for political parties, individuals overseas, businesses overseas to transfer money to internal party candidates. And the third and perhaps most important potential source is illicit business. So when you look at the numbers for the tobacco industry, the illegal tobacco industry actually was tremendously empowered by Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, as was the illegal alcohol industry, which now accounts for, I think, a third of all alcohol, what appears to be legitimate alcohol bought. A majority, I think, was the latest number of tobacco. These are big businesses that have political clout and that fund politicians. So when you find politicians like Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma or Mashitile or Julius Malema in the company of people who are reported, rumored, alleged to be involved with illicit businesses, you should be concerned about how their money is influencing the war chests available to people for campaigns. So the money issue is a big one, and we know that people like Mkhunu and perhaps even other politicians who've been found with cash about their persons or in their furniture, that these may be the kinds of monetary donations that are needed to grease the wheels in internal party politics and in elections.
You know what was, Prof, sorry to cut you off, but what you're reminding me of that 2017 time, because it was the first, you see, because campaigning was actually outlawed in the ANC, which probably created the problem. So you had to campaign without acting like you're campaigning. And then what Ramaphosa did was actually, well, not Ramaphosa, but CR17 did, was actually like trying to professionalize an illegal thing, if you like, right? And that's why there was like a bank account, and there was a campaign manager, and all of this. Like there was receipts, which was like not known in the ANC. But that's why we know he spent so much, right? But the funniest thing is that we found out that like they had to quarantine delegates and like and like pay for toothbrush and roll on and stuff like that. But the point is that when you're saying about that sources of money, Prof, it's like that was such a big moment of reckoning when it all spilled over in the public domain. And you would have thought that there would have been some sort of shake-up in that regard, and there really hasn't been. Just in terms, like, that should have been the moment that says, okay, either we streamline it, either we have a threshold, either we have whatever, some sort of governance, internal governance process.
So you expect the same thing to happen again next year?
That's what I'm saying. All it does is that it creates, exactly to Tara's point, is that it just creates the incentive that you have to outspend. So now you have a bar. To win, I need $500 million. Give me 600 million, and then I'm good to go.
Yeah.
So the chances of something like a donor trying to influence your policy decisions later on, will that be a fact to reckon with in future?
I think it will be. And there are two things at play. Yes, donor funding, because the ANC is not receiving the donations it used to. And political parties take a lot of money just to operate on a day-to-day basis. When we're looking at staffing, when we're looking at campaigning, I mean, to put on an elective conference, we're looking at hundreds of millions of rands that need for this to happen. So donor funding will impact policy decisions. The ANC goes to its policy conference at the end of this year, but also the internal political wielding. I mean, Qaanitah rightly mentioned David Mabuza and his role that he played in 2017. I think the political wielder of the next ANC elective conference will be Gert Montashe. He has said, he is done after this year. He doesn't want to come back anymore. Gwerde's legacy will be passing on the mantle to Oscar Mabayane, who has really had almost disastrous leadership in the Eastern Cape and his role in the Eastern Cape faction. But when we look at the policy decisions of the ANC, the two factions of the ANC aren't on the same page. They don't really know where to go after falling below 50. They don't really know what is the next step for the party, what is the political vision, the policy vision for the ANC and how to lead. More specifically, how do they do that in a GNU context? Because for the first time, we're going into a policy conference where the ANC doesn't have a majority. They are going to set their agenda and what they would like to achieve politically, but they don't have the numbers to do so. And I think that is going to heavily influence what is on the table come December.
So it was a sort of a psychological barrier that they crossed when they got below 50%. And the future of this country, is it coalition politics?
Yes. I think the number one issue with the ANC is that it's not honest with itself about who they are, about how the party operates, about the reality facing the party. You could speak to top ANC officials, and they believe they could get back to 50+1. It is a fundamental belief inside the ANC, and we as the public look and be like, that's actually not possible when you look at the deterioration of the ANC leadership across the country. But coalition politics is ultimately the future. But the sad reality that we face in South Africa is not worrying necessarily about how the votes are going to be split up amongst the various political parties, because very little has actually changed if we look into the early 2000s, right? When we look at the ANC, MK, and the EFF, that quintessentially is the ANC voting bloc. Those political parties all made up the ANC when it had its 60+1 majority. So that has still continued. That voting bloc has stayed the same. The Democratic Alliance hasn't grown largely in the last 10, 15 years. They've actually lost 600,000 votes from 2014 up until 2024. And so when we look at the fact that that voting bloc has stayed the same, the real challenge for South Africa is that people aren't voting. And that is the big issue. I mean, when we look at the last election, there were about 13 million people who were eligible to vote and did not vote. That could drastically change the electorate. The issue that we're facing now is that people do not have a credible political party that they can vote for. And that is becoming the biggest challenge, is because how do you make decisions as a political party about the future of the country when majority of the country isn't even participating in the election process?
What is a credible political party, Prof? Credible, yes. Like Tara now says, people don't want to vote for any party because they don't see them as credible. Or few people vote because they don't see enough credible parties.
Yeah, well, understanding why people vote and don't vote is a bit of a vexed question in political science. One of the few really reliable findings in political science is that you're more likely to be run over on the way to the polling station than it is for your vote to make any difference to the outcome of the election. So voting is in some respects fundamentally a rational activity to engage in, especially without taxis, increasing your chances of dying on the way to the station. So I'm not sure it's to do with a lack of credibility of the parties. It may be more to do with persistent despair about the outcomes and not seeing anybody there who you can engage with and trust. So there's very widespread cynicism about politics. But at the same time, the opposition parties that exist now, they don't reach out to people and engage them. And I don't think anybody will look at Jordan Hill-Lewis, who isn't already voting for the DA, and say, this person is speaking to me about people like me. No matter how superb he has been as a mayor at engaging, I think there are different sorts of tasks, but I might be proved wrong. And the same is true of Roger Jardine or Songezo Zibi or Musi Maimani. They may have some, in Musi's case, name recognition, but I don't think they're going to create a huge mass-based organization. It's possible, the two parties, I was looking at Tara's book earlier, and I was struck by your account of the Patriotic Alliance. And it may be that we're going to move to a more fluid party system with parties like Patriotic Alliance and MK Party becoming a more normal part of our scene. Single leader parties that are identity-based, populist, and people see the leaders and they think, well, that person is going to fight for me or for people like me. And that's a more typical pattern in the Global South, in Southern African politics, in Latin American politics to some extent. And it may well be that the party system will change its dynamics, because it's been pretty stable, actually. And we can reliably, when people ask how many votes are the DA going to get, we're all going to say 20 plus something. EFF 10 plus a little bit. But
So
yeah.
The hyperfragmentation is a worrying thing, no?
Yeah, there are too many parties then.
Well, too many parties for the big parties. They don't like it. So the big parties will keep pushing for thresholds.
No, but the what worries me, Prof, is that we've seen the trend of fragmentation of voting in local government, right? Because 2016 you had the introduction of coalitions. 21 you've had the further fragmentation, right? So the party and what has happened in local government is that no party. So the whole thing about coalitions is that it will force parties to do better because they don't have ultimate control. We've had the opposite effect in coalitions in a local government, is to say getting into government is the incentive for me to get more power, right? So if you can't beat them, you join them. And effective opposition has completely whittled away, right? So what fragmentation of politics does is that now there's a frenzy to kind of get into the door of so now if there's 10 parties governing South Africa this time, is it 13 or 15 in the next round, right? And all I need is one ministry or one chairperson committee or something that just gives me because remember, the Patriotic Alliance, their first election they contested was 2014, they got 14,000 votes. South Africa rejected what they gave. The thing that was a game changer for Patriotic Alliance was when Gert became a mayor. And it kind of oh, okay, this is fresh, this is and people, everyone is trying to embody that, to say, what does the EFF have to be the MEC of finance and Gauteng? But I just need to get some access so I can use that as some sort of dress rehearsal for the public. And so then it for me is that you're actually up against a more shambolic sort of governance structure. And it's too late to even have conversations about thresholds, because if we should have had it when it was that conversation in 2019, because lawmaking takes 5 or 6 years at best.
Yeah, Gaitan is enjoying being Minister of Sport, Arts and Culture. It's putting him in an even better position. And it seems that the PA is doing much better. This morning yesterday they took another seat from the DA in Stellenbosch. And you wrote a lot about the PA. You said it's a sort of identity politics. There's a return to identity politics, but there's also a lot of anger involved. Explain that to us, please.
The rise of the Patriotic Alliance has a lot to do with two specific things. Gayton McKenzie has really preyed on coloured suffering, specifically in working class coloured communities. For many coloured South Africans, specifically in the Western Cape, and that's where the Patriotic Alliance does really well, is that they almost have this distorted proportionality view of modern-day South Africa. Coloured South Africans are about 40% of the population in the city of Cape Town, and I think broadly about 45% in the Western Cape. That is not the broad reality of South Africa. Coloured South Africans are only about 7% of the population nationally. And so for many coloured South Africans who have stayed in a relative socioeconomic position pre-1994 and post-1994, they look around and they see a small minority of black South Africans who have been uplifted into positions of social and economic power, and they're saying, but where are the coloured South Africans? And this is a sentiment, I've done a lot of work, and if you go into the Cape Plus, they will say, but our people are not they're not ministers, they're not in positions of power. It's almost a narrative for many colored South Africans that they feel with the rise of black South Africans that they've also lost out in some manner. And Gert has capitalized on that. But it's almost a broader political sentiment in the way that the EFF has also capitalized on that anger amongst young South Africans and amongst students, how MK has capitalized amongst that anger of many people regionally in KZN, is that South Africans and the rise of populist politics is directly linked to the fact that we have two major issues in South Africa: stagnant economic growth and crime. Those are the two issues that South Africans care the most about. You ask any South African, if you could change anything about this country, what would you change? It would be one of those two things. And the government hasn't found a way to address those two problems. And as a result of that, you have populist figures being able to capitalize on the fear and the anger of South Africans. And that's why you see the rise of parties like the Patriotic Alliance. In 2024, the Good Party prior, in 2019, had really held a monopoly on the coloured vote that had fragmented away from the DA. In 2024, the Good Party lost 40,000 votes. That directly went to the Patriotic Alliance when you look at the wards that the Good Party had lost. And it is this capitalization on fear in conjunction with the fact that the government at large isn't addressing these problems. You know, the GNU was sold to South Africans as almost this broad-based answer to a quote-unquote doomsday coalition, but the economy has completely stagnated. Crime is higher than ever. And it's these basic bread and butter issues that the government hasn't been able to control. And I mean, we haven't really seen any economic growth since the early 2000s, and we are not growing at a 5% GDP rate to keep up with our growing population. So when you look at things like high crime, high unemployment, even high youth unemployment, that is directly linked to the rise of populism. Specifically, I think when you look at the hyper-fragmentation in the political system, I mean, we had 52 political parties on the ballot in 2024. That is also a response to the fact that the ANC has been dominant in governance for the past 30 years. We've had this ANC hegemony governing the country where what the ANC said and what the NEC of the ANC said was the law of South Africa, basically. And hyperfragmentation is a response to that for many South Africans saying, you know what, I want to feel represented. I want someone to speak for me and my issues and my needs. Because for many South Africans, and we see this in the Patriotic Alliance as an example, colored South Africans feel like the issues that they are experiencing is unique to them. They themselves are victims of crime on the Cape Flats. They themselves are victims of high unemployment rate. The Afrikaner community feel they themselves are victims of crime when we're looking at the increase in farm murders. So South Africans have common issues. They all just experience it in different ways, and political parties are being able to tailoring their message in order to capture these groups of voters.
But it's very difficult to counter this populism, Prof. Especially the DA is going to have problems in the Western Cape, countering the PA.
Yes, I mean, I'm not sure that I would describe it as populism. Certainly, Mackenzie has a populist style, but there's a genuine sense of grievance, as Tara has pointed out, and it resurfaced again at the recent DA elective conference. It's very notable that the DA has fairly consistently failed to elect prominent coloured politicians to important leadership positions, and in fact in the last conference, for reasons that are obvious nationally, it exaggerated the importance of the election of a black politician to a figurehead position in the party. It's very impossible to, the journalists will know, is it the federal chair? Yes, yes. So I think there's a real basis for this grievance, that the DA has a similar problem with its traditional right-wing white Afrikaner constituency as well, that all parties are at root coalitions themselves, and they face the same stresses in holding themselves together as a coalition does, and the DA faces those too, and they can't simply take for granted the votes of coloured South Africans.
We were talking about MK, Qaanitah, and how do you see the future for MK? It's also based on the anger of the people. The people in KwaZulu-Natal felt the ANC treated them badly.
Yeah, so MK was an answer for three things. One is the lack of representation. The ANC no longer representing or appearing to represent Zulu people. One, two. The demise of the Zulu king and the IFP leader Mangosuthu Buthelezi, and this need to have a figurehead and to rally around somebody in the form of Jacob Zuma. And the third is the involvement of the taxi industry and the construction mafia, and the need and the realization that we will dump the ANC first, because the current iteration of leaders in the ANC in KwaZulu-Natal were just a bunch of juvenile delinquents, right? And so, are we being recorded? But anyways, it's fine. I've said was, but essentially, so that was MK. MK on Jacob Zuma's side was what gave his party food, what gave his family food to eat, right? He's not been able to build because Zuma has never been able to build. Zuma's a destroyer. He was never a builder in the last 15, 20 years of this country. He was a destroyer of things. And so to keep that MK party intact. Now the thing is, the ANC got the hardest lesson it would have ever felt in its life in KwaZulu-Natal, and yet was not able to learn the lesson there. And there's still, Balula is in KZN, he was in KZN, when was it, 2 days ago? Yeah. And there's still drama. Oh, maybe we must get Becky Tele. Oh, come on.
So they will never recuperate it.
They'll because you're not learning the lesson. It's not burning enough, right? And so when it comes to the KwaZulu-Natal thing, is that you kind of have to, you remember years ago, Prof. Khalima Mutlandi said you must let this thing die, and then whatever grows from the ashes of the ANC is going to be the correct ANC. And I think that when we think about who the future of South Africa is, I think we must just somewhat accept who the ANC gives us. I think the public must not be emotionally invested in, if the ANC wants to front a corrupt guy, let them do it. It does. So when I say the 26, the 27 ANC internal election is an inconsequential election, let them decide who they want to give us, and let the public decide whether they want them or not.
Strong words.
Aye. But it's just us best.
You wanted to add something, Tara?
I think Qaanitah is absolutely right. The ANC does not learn its lesson. And it started with Cape Town. I mean, to lose the city of Cape Town, where there is arguably the most established infrastructure inside a city, and to lose control of that city because of your poor lack of leadership. Then we saw it again in Joburg when they lost the city of Joburg. Again, to lose the economic hub of the country as the leading majority. And now in KZN, we've just seen them fall at the wayside to the MK party. When we trace those losses, the ANC has not learned their lesson. They did not learn their lesson nationally either. And the problem is the ANC is not honest with itself about the internal corruption, about the poor leadership inside the party. Yes, there are people who want the ANC to govern good and want the ANC to do well. But that, unfortunately, is not the broader national sentiment of the party. And until the ANC is honest with itself, it's going to continue to fall into the ground, and then they need to rebuild. But I think that it's actually quite sad for many South Africans to see this party of liberation, this party who has played a pivotal role in South African history to bring South Africa to democracy, now be in a governing position within the democracy and essentially burn the country down.
Prof, the last question will go to you. You know, we've been criticizing the ANC. Lots of people are criticizing Cyril Ramaphosa. What has he achieved as leader of the ANC, as president of the country? And don't we expect a little bit too much of our president?
Well, I would say it's too early to tell. So he's still there, and he, as we know, he doesn't rush into important decisions. Some of them we're now seeing some fruits of his early labours. We've just said goodbye to a SARS commissioner, for example, who seems to have, to a significant degree, rebuilt one of the institutions that Zuma tried to undermine. there are many institutions that have been progressively decaying. We see some reform in the electricity sector, logistics sector, where persistent efforts have been made to address problems that have accumulated over time. I think for me the most important moment in Ramaphosa's presidency was after the 2024 elections, when the ANC had 40%. And you recall the reaction of Jacob Zuma was to refuse to accept the outcome for MK Party, despite the MK Party's very high vote share, unexpectedly high. And it did make me wonder whether a Zuma faction in charge of the ANC would have accepted that election outcome. And around the world we find electoral authoritarianism is growing, that elections are held, but the incumbents ensure that they win, they challenge outcomes they don't like. And I think that Ramaphosa, he came to the election results center, walked around with the IEC head and head of elections with great confidence, and he made a very clear statement that the people had spoken. And I thought that was an important moment in the transition to a full democracy that people could trust, right? They could trust the politics of that democracy. And there are other, I think we call them intangible legacies. You know, this thinking about legacies is a fatal issue for all professional politicians. When they're about to go, they suddenly start to worry that all their good work is not appreciated, going to be undone. And maybe he has left some important intangible legacies about respecting the Constitution, rule of law, dialogue. And so, as is typical of former presidents, he may be looked back on more fondly when, when he's not around anymore than he is currently.
Thanks a lot, Prof. Is daar enige vrae? Are there any questions? Net hand opsteek en dan bring ons vir julle 'n mic.
Good morning. I just want to know, is it a rumor or is it true that Motsepe is actually family of Cyril Ramaphosa? Is married to his family or something like that?
Cyril Ramaphosa's wife is Patrice Motsepe's sister.
Now that brings interesting dynamics into the whole situation. Thank you very much.
The rumor is they don't like each other too much.
That's the real rumor.
My question is, the national dialogue, is it dead?
Ask Tara that. Tara has to chase politicians more than I do these days.
So, you know, when this was announced, I had some very brazen words about the national dialogue, and I got in trouble because I said that it's basically a glorified TED Talk. So the president actually does imbizos, where he goes into various wards across South Africa to speak to residents, to gather information, and that it's supposed to inform policy decisions. The national dialogue is basically just a formalized version of that. So the national dialogue is still currently ongoing. It is supposed to run from, I think, until 2027, the end of 2027. And what they're planning to do is go into every single ward across South Africa and host town halls, gather information from South Africans, and then they're supposed to use that to formulate the new policy agenda for the current administration. Do I think the national dialogue in its entirety is going to happen? No. The government currently has an issue with completion of tasks that they set out, but yes, it is still currently ongoing.
Sorry, I've got a second question. The sort of young group of the DA that has come into power with Jordan Hill Lewis now, and a very young group with him. Do you think that's going to change the party a lot, and also like the Rainbow Nation? Thank you very much.
I think it's important that the DA had this sort of leadership cohort, sort of millennials, because it's kind of in tune with the young population of South Africa, right? Remember, this is the fact. It's not the people who are going to vote. You can't increase your votes by taking votes from the ANC as a DA or from. What you have to do is you have to mobilize the people who are not voting. All parties have that problem. They can't steal. If you're going to vote for the ANC, you're going to vote for the ANC. You're going to vote for the DA, you're going to vote for the DA. What they have to do now is to try to convince people who kind of tapped out of the political ecosystem. So you know, in New York, you had Mayor Mamdani elected. He didn't do much more than get people who would have said, this is not for me, and mobilize them in that way, right? And so what Jordan Hill-Lewis has an advantage is that he has an advantage in that he can speak to majority of South Africans because he's young and recognizable and flips and TikTok and whatever. But I don't know why they seem to be so hamstrung, tied to liberalism in that way, because that thing has never made them go past 20%, to be so loyal to liberal politics. So if they don't want to shake that element, if they want to make it about BE and transformation, I don't know. You're gonna serve your current base, but you're not gonna get those who are. You're not gonna mobilize those who are tapped out to come and vote for you. My advice to the young mayor is Paul Mamdani, make Social Democrat your policy position. Tell Helen Zille to chill. Right?
Be difficult.
Try to just maneuver the DA out of that corner if you really want to govern. And you kind of have a chance if you just want to just leave the baggage of Tony Leon and Helen Zille. Try something new. But anyways, I'm not a politician, so.
Do you want to add something to that, Prof?
Yeah, I think that he's a very interesting politician, very effective, and so too is the person who's taken over from Zille, Ashur Sarapen, who's also young and understands more contemporary methods of campaigning. And I think they both do, and I think that's really important to reaching people in elections now. And they are both also not polarizing figures. And I do think it's true, the one criticism I would make, I don't dare criticize Helen Zille normally for fear of our next encounter, but she can be a polarizing figure. So sometimes she goes out of her way to be polarizing, and that really isn't what the DA needs. So we'll see. I mean, I don't really buy into the liberalism thing. I don't think it's a liberal party, and I think liberalism for the DA is like the National Democratic Revolution for the ANC. You know, it can mean more or less whatever you want it to mean. And it's quite useful. Both of them are quite useful ideas for performing that function, for allowing people to look like they agree with each other. But I don't think that they need to adopt a new doctrine. Gwede Mantashe has already said that the ANC is a social democratic party. So they've covered that ground already. If that's social democracy, I'm not sure that the voters will particularly go for it.
Add something?
I think the DA's main problem is that they're not growing. You know, they framed 2024 and the GNU and entering government as this massive success for the DA. John Steenhuisen exclaimed that it was his mission accomplished. The DA entered government not because of their own success, but because of the ANC's failure. And even within the ANC's failure, the DA was the official opposition for 20 years. And when the ANC had its moment, it fell below 50%. the DA, who had been in opposition, the official opposition for more than 20 years, did not make a credible enough campaign to the South African public to say we should be the alternative. And that is the DA's issue, is that South Africans are not voting for the DA. Majority of South Africans don't vote for the DA. To be the second largest party, to garner 20% of the national vote, isn't that impressive when you look at the fact that only 57% of the population is voting. And that is the DA's biggest issue, is what the DA has always counted on, is the fact that their base is very loyal and that they can ensure that their base is going to get out and vote. But they have not been able to grow that base, and that is John Hill-Lewis's problem currently. As regards to the new slate of leadership, I do think that the DA needed this change. It needed its own era of renewal. But will that fundamentally grow the DA? I think that is something that is yet to be tested.
Thanks a lot. And we started with Patrice Motsepe and we ended with the DA, but thanks a lot for all your contributions. It was very interesting listening to you and reading your books, and thanks once again for your time.